When summer arrives in Canada, crowds gather to watch an annual celebration of international aviation. "1989 was a special year for Air Show Canada, held annually near Abbotsford, British Columbia. As relations between East and West thawed, Russian aircraft descended upon North America.
And now I think it would be a nice time to welcome all our friends from the Soviet Union who are down at the south end of the field and thank them for bringing this amazing group of airplanes to our air show this year. Let's have a nice round of applause for our entire Soviet delegation.
High-performance Soviet aircraft like the MiG-29 fighter, piloted by Anatoly Kovachev, dazzled the crowd. But that year, it wasn't the fighters that stole the show. It was a Russian giant, the Antonov 225. Designed to deliver the Soviet space shuttle Buran, the massive AN-225 is in a class all by itself. In the transport business, size matters. Antonov officials named their creation the Mriya, or Dream, because it is by far the heaviest and most powerful aircraft ever built. Since the time of Tsar Nicholas II, Russians have shown a keen interest in aviation. Nicholas encouraged early designers and urged them to build the largest aircraft of the time. A young designer named Igor Sikorsky answered the challenge with the biggest airplane in the world, the four-engine Ruski Vitaz, or Russian Knight. The success of the giant led to an even larger version named Ilya Muromets, after the legendary hero of Kiev. 80 of these aircraft served as bombers in World War I. Survivors continued into the 1920s as Bolshevik transports, thus giving Russia an early lead in the development of multi-engine aircraft. The Russians also gained a head start in the fledgling art of airborne warfare, which had captured the attention of several armies around the globe. During the 1920s, pioneering experiments were conducted using Polikarpov PO-2 biplanes. The first soldiers from the sky were wing walkers, who leapt carefully from their precarious roosts. By the early 1930s, the Soviets had dropped hundreds of parachutists together with automatic weapons and artillery. Red Army planners recognized the early need for airborne assault troops. They struggled to solve the mysteries of maximum combat loadings versus minimum safe jump altitudes, as well as the best method of training this new type of soldier. Transports were important in the vast Soviet Union. While the Russians had experience building large aircraft, it was the Germans who specialized in developing people movers. The Soviets were forced to buy airplanes like this Junkers and modify them to the harsh climate. By the early 1930s, a bright young engineer named Andrei N. Tupolev helped give Russia its own identity in the construction of large aircraft. Following a series of successful designs, he built the mammoth AN-T-20, an airplane so large that each of its tires weighed more than his first airplane design. Named after the celebrated Bolshevik writer Maxim Gorky, the colossal AN-T-20 was the flagship of a proposed 20-plane propaganda squadron. It was the largest aircraft in the world and the highlight of Andrei Tupolev's career. Although the Maxim Gorky was doomed by a tragic accident, a civil variant served as a passenger aircraft and later as a heavy-lift military transport. Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin was a prime mover behind the use of civil aviation to enhance Russia's national prestige, but his main interest was the military application of aircraft. He was bent on developing agrarian Russia into a modern military juggernaut, more powerful than any country in the West. Andrei Tupolev was given the task of developing aircraft to this end. He turned his attention to designing an airplane that could be used as a bomber or a transport. The result was the TB-3. Its main purpose was to carry airborne soldiers. This versatile aircraft is considered by experts to be one of the greatest achievements in aviation history. Unlike earlier giants, the TB-3 filled a real need. It allowed the Red Army to carry out massive parachute exercises, displaying a new flexibility in airborne warfare. It also highlighted the nation's capability to produce and develop aircraft over many years. Tupolev's design gave the Soviet Union the greatest strategic capability in the world. These new ideas in warfare gave military commanders renewed confidence as their forces evolved from a peasant army into a modern military machine. Brimming with confidence, Joseph Stalin set his sights on settling a simmering territorial dispute with neighboring Finland. Finnish President Kalja frowned on Stalin's demands. The situation soon reached an impasse. Within weeks, Soviet TB-3s droned over the frozen Finnish countryside, bringing an invasion from the sky. But the Finns were prepared. They met the airborne onslaught head-on. Their modest army was comprised of rugged outdoorsmen who were swift and savvy in the snow-covered forests. They cut the Red Army to pieces in a series of well-executed ambush attacks. Thousands of Soviet soldiers were captured during a winter war characterized by intense fighting. The Russians eventually prevailed, but only after committing 1 million troops to the battle. The invasion was a blunder that highlighted the weaknesses of the Soviet military. Joseph Stalin's plan had backfired. He knew the world was watching with keen interest. Adolf Hitler judged the Red Army incompetent. Soon he would hurl the weight of an offensive eastwards. Shocked and betrayed by the invasion, Stalin appealed to the Allies for help. He needed air mobility more than ever with the Germans on the move. In America, the Douglas DC-3 airliner had been modified for military use. The result was a potent airlifter, designated the C-47. It proved to be an incredibly rugged twin-engine aircraft that formed the backbone of British and American air transport during the war. The Russians had also recognized its importance. In 1936, Russian aircraft engineer Boris Lazunov visited Douglas Aircraft Company in Santa Monica, California. He came to study the DC-2, but was awed by the new DC-3. He convinced Soviet authorities that it was by far the better airplane. Permission was obtained to build DC-3s in the Soviet Union under license. First known as the PS-84, the aircraft was modified for cold weather use. Despite the desire for minimal adjustments, over 1,293 engineering changes were ordered on the original Douglas blueprints. Renamed the Li-2 in recognition of Lazunov's achievement, the aircraft became Russia's primary troop airlifter. It often operated from frozen airstrips inside the vast reaches of the Soviet Union. These incredibly tough and reliable transports carried troops and cargo to famous battles in Stalingrad, Kursk, and Kharkov. They also served with distinction in other roles, when used as bombers, forest fire fighters, and glider tugs. Another aircraft also served well in a secondary role. The PE-8 was a pure Russian design and the only Soviet heavy bomber of the Great Patriotic War. The project was created in 1934 in answer to a requirement for precision bombing from an altitude of 10 kilometers with a range of 4,500 kilometers. The aircraft was designed by Andrei Tupolev, but following his arrest during Stalin's purges, the project was taken over by Vladimir M. Petlyakov. The PE-8 used unreliable diesel engines and proved unsuccessful as a bomber. A re-engined version was used to ferry Prime Minister Molotov to meetings in Dundee, Scotland, and to Washington, D.C. to discuss Lend-Lease policy. The big Petlyakov didn't work well as a bomber, but it proved useful as a diplomatic courier aircraft. Meanwhile, a rising star was making his mark in the Soviet aviation industry. Born in Vladivostok as the son of a fisherman, Sergei Llanishen rose to prominence as the designer of the IL-2 Stromovik tank buster. After World War II, Llanishen moved into the transport business. His first effort was the IL-12, designed in 1944 as a successor to the Li-2. An air assault version was built, but the aircraft's fuel consumption was high. It also suffered from handling problems. Better performance was realized in the follow-on IL-14, which was the first Soviet aircraft widely exported to more than 30 countries. Llanishen would go on to establish a solid reputation as a builder of giant transport aircraft. In the early 1950s, major steps have been taken in the world of air transport. In 1954, the Americans developed the most legendary airlifter ever built, the Lockheed C-130. The airplane's rugged design and high performance added a new dimension to airborne military operations. Not to be outdone, Russia's answer was the AN-12, one of the first in a long line of heavy-lift aircraft built by the Antonov Design Bureau. Early tests of the new aircraft were promising. The aircraft first flew in prototype form in 1958. It was based on the earlier AN-10 airframe and was powered by 4 Kuznetsov NK-4 engines. The transport featured a full-section rear door, but the designers were forced to abandon pressurization of the cargo hold. The AN-12 was fitted with a titanium floor, stressed to handle high-weight loading. Cargo was positioned with the aid of an electric crane, capable of traveling the length of the hold. The new aircraft was codenamed the Cub in the West. The cockpit area was pressurized, as well as a 14-seat compartment added behind the flight deck for crews of armored fighting vehicles. In the 1950s and 60s, military theorists felt certain that any war in Europe would involve large-scale air assault operations. In case of an attack from the east, Western leaders relied on the member armies of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, called NATO. In theory, these forces would provide a tripwire defense, while U.S. nuclear weapons did their work. The Soviet Union and its Warsaw Pact allies had a different plan, however. This called for an all-out offensive, spearheaded in part by fleets of AN-12s, delivering overwhelming air-mobile shock forces. The Red Army pioneered the use of innovative applications like the retro rocket to slow the fall of heavy equipment. The Soviet Air Force worked steadily throughout the Cold War to improve the quantity and quality of its transport aircraft and air assault capability. The subsequent and continuing improvement took NATO by surprise. Many AN-12s were converted to serve in other duties. This aircraft was used at the Zhukovsky Flight Test Center near Moscow to conduct ejection seat studies. Other variants of the Cub include those adapted for electronic warfare use, An electronic countermeasure, or ECM version, carried several tons of electric generation and control gear. The cargo hold was devoted to palletized systems intended to jam NATO air defense radars. The modification to conduct tests of rocket ejection seats is one of the more unusual variants of the standard Cub. The arrival of a giant new transport from the Antonov Bureau, the AN-22, was intended to address shortfalls in Soviet airlift capability and help restore Russian prestige. It was the largest aircraft in existence when introduced in 1965. The Soviets nicknamed the AN-22 the Antheus, after the giant son of Poseidon and Gaia in Greek mythology. NATO codenamed it the Cock. There were high hopes for the aircraft's development as a military transport and commercial airliner capable of moving over 700 passengers. Unfortunately, the AN-22 didn't live up to its expectations. The Antheus was designed to carry the full range of Soviet tanks and armored vehicles, including surface-to-air missile launchers. Like the AN-12 Cub, pressurization in the AN-22 was restricted to the flight deck and forward fuselage, which could accommodate only 29 passengers. Despite its drawbacks, the Antheus had an enormous load capability. The cargo hold featured a floor of reinforced titanium, fitted with a non-slip finish, and cargo locks. It had a combination door and ramp, which allowed heavy cargo, like main battle tanks, to be brought inside and lifted by cranes that ran on overhead steel rails. The wingspan of the massive turboprop was 211 feet. In a heroic record attempt, the Antheus lifted 220,000 pounds to a height of 25,000 feet. But in spite of its success as a record setter, the AN-22 was disappointing in service. The Antonov Design Bureau would have to wait before it gained undisputed preeminence as a designer of giant transports. Another Antonov creation, the AN-30, is one of the few special-purpose designed aerial survey aircraft. It features an extended glazed nose and a raised flight deck to give the navigator a wide field of view. It has optical cameras and a darkroom, as well as sensors for all types of mapping. In the United States, the concept of air mobility had taken on a new importance. President Lyndon Johnson visited Edwards Air Force Base to see the latest aircraft. One was the giant Lockheed C-141 Starlifter. Used extensively in Vietnam, it was America's first all-jet long-range transport. C-141s provided crucial airlift capability, dropping paratroopers, carrying air mobile units, and evacuating seriously wounded servicemen to the Philippines, Japan, and Hawaii. Through long, reliable service, the Starlifter proved to be the workhorse of the U.S. Air Mobility Command. The Russian answer to the C-141 was developed by the Llanishen Design Bureau. The new IL-76 was powered by 4 turbofan engines, and in many ways it resembled the Lockheed Starlifter, though it was slightly larger. It was 153 feet long, with a wingspan of 165 feet. The prototype first flew in March 1971, and was quickly codenamed Candid by NATO. It was a large aircraft, but not a giant one. Russian airlift capability had been eclipsed by the West since the pioneering experiments of the 1930s. The Soviets answered the challenge with a series of airborne exercises aimed at giving them the edge in the race to intervene militarily in times of crisis. IL-76s were used extensively in these operations, though the Candid is smaller than most of its Western counterparts. Designed to operate in the harsh Russian climate, the Llanishen flies in all weather conditions. Its airborne cargo delivery systems were adapted from the Soviet space program. The aircraft drops its load from a great height with only a single parachute to slow it. It descends quickly until sensors ignite retro-rockets just before touchdown. In 1979, the Soviet Union airlifted 5,000 airborne troops into Kabul, the Afghan capital. These troops assisted in overthrowing the Afghan government and replacing it with a pro-Soviet regime. The Il-76 is still in service at the Zhukovsky Flight Test Center outside Moscow. The aircraft was intended to replace the multi-role turbo-powered AN-12 Cub. Designers were tasked with producing an aircraft that could carry almost 90,000 pounds of freight, a distance of 3,100 miles, in less than 6 hours. These feats were to be accomplished under the worst conditions of the Siberian winter. The Il-76 is a versatile aircraft. This variant is able to drop large quantities of fire retardant. In July 1976, the candidate established 25 official payload to altitude and speed records. There is also an airborne early warning and control version similar to the US AWACS. It is known to NATO by its codename Mainstay. It is traditional for Russia to always use its aircraft as flexibly as possible. This candidate is performing very low-level cargo drop test runs. This major variant took 10 years to develop from the mid-1970s to the mid-1980s. The tanker version is known to NATO as the Midas. These thirsty MiG-23 fighters are maneuvering to drink from the Midas's large replenishment tanks. Earlier Soviet aircraft used a wingtip-to-wingtip design, but the system used by the Il-76 extends from the fuselage and wings of the tanker aircraft. The fuel lines connect to refueling probes, located near the pilot's canopy on the MiG-23. This makes it possible to refuel more than one aircraft at a time. This flexible system also allows the Midas to greatly extend the range of strategic bombers, such as the Tupolev Tu-95 Bear turboprop. It is also capable of refueling the supersonic swing-wing Tupolev Backfire and Tu-160 Blackjack bombers. This functionality became irrelevant due to the strategic arms limitation talks of the mid-1970s. The agreements included the removal of the refueling probes from the Backfire Bs, but aviation authorities believed they could be replaced, as well as added to the Tu-160 Blackjacks. Since its entry into service, the Midas has been exported to several countries, including Algeria, the Czech and Slovak republics, India, Iraq, and Poland. The Il-76 has also undergone constant improvement. The multiple fuel line system has been upgraded and is now used to refuel the new generation of Russian fighters. The Midas is a very effective companion to the Sukhoi Su-27 and MiG-29 air superiority fighters. The AWACS-type early warning variant was one of many Llanishen Il-76 configurations. The entire project was managed by the Beriev Design Bureau, which fitted the rotodome and electronics package in partnership with NPO Vega. Beriev is well known for designing aircraft, but not just those that fly from land. This is the BE-42, known simply in Russia as the Albatross. It is the fastest, most sophisticated flying boat ever built. Dr. Georgy Beriev established his own design bureau in 1932 at Taganrog on the Black Sea. He would enjoy a straightforward career as one of the legendary figures in flying boat construction. The BE-10 was designed to be a fast, long-range flying boat, giving the Soviet Navy the flexibility only seaplanes can give. Little was known about this impressive twin-jet aircraft for over 30 years in the West. The only aircraft of its class to go into production, the BE-10 displayed good seaworthiness and handling characteristics, except in heavy seas or strong winds. The aircraft was quite powerful, having double the BE-6's speed and altitude and 3 times its rate of climb. Beriev's jet flying boat was a record breaker. In 1961, it set 4 speed and weight to altitude records, more than any seaplane at the time. For reasons of secrecy, the U.S. Navy did not allow its famed Seamaster to claim record flights. Although never produced in great numbers, the BE-10 was quite an achievement for Georgy Beriev and his colleagues. They noted, however, that jet engines and salt water didn't mix well. Their next effort, the BE-12 turboprop, would prove to be an outstanding maritime patrol and transport aircraft. The aircraft was also used to put out fires and in search and rescue missions. The hardy amphibian still flies today at shows like Gelendzhik on the Black Sea, an area so beautiful it is sometimes referred to as the Russian Riviera. For this vintage BE-12, maritime reconnaissance is still a main role, together with passenger and cargo transport operations. It is also used as a water bomber to help put out forest fires. In spite of the BE-12's success, the dream of a jet-powered flying boat never died in the 1980s. Beriev came up with a completely new A-40 design to replace the BE-12. The new aircraft soon appeared on American satellite photos, while it completed rough sea tests. It featured a narrow oval fuselage topped with a long wing for increased range efficiency. An improved hull design allows for easier unsticking during takeoffs. The A-40 was powered by 2 powerful D-30 turbofans and 2 auxiliary R-60K jet engines. By 1988, the aircraft was ready to go. Its future looked promising. There were good reasons to bring back the A-40 jet. A potential role was to quickly rescue submarine crews in trouble. A flying boat offers a good rescue platform for stricken vessels like this Russian sub that was stranded off Scotland in the North Sea. Meanwhile, at Sagi, engineers and researchers were already looking at the next step. By the early 1990s, hydrodynamic and open water channel tests were conducted to investigate new hull configurations. In the mid-90s, Beriev was showing off its greatest flying boat, the BE-200. Unlike the A-40, it was designed from the start for the civil transport market. The new amphibian can trace its ancestry directly to its forerunner, the A-40. Although smaller, the BE-200 is designed to carry 68 passengers and 8 tons of cargo. The designers claim their new flying boat will be very effective in its other roles. These variants include cargo transport, environmental protection, and sea-air rescue. The BE-200 is also claimed to be the world's most effective firefighting aircraft, capable of scooping up and delivering 360 tons of water or foam during a typical mission without refueling. In the 1970s, McDonnell Douglas flew the YC-15. The goal was to create a transport aircraft capable of short takeoff and landing. Its competition was the YC-14, built by Boeing. This aircraft had a strange engine design. The goal was the same, but Boeing engineers used a different approach. They located the engines high over the wings to blow air down over the flaps of this technology demonstrator. At the 1989 Paris Air Show, a similar aircraft was on display. It was the AN-74, the Russian answer to the YC-14. Built by the Antonov Design Bureau to achieve the same goals, it was designed as a multi-role transport based on the earlier AN-72 short takeoff and landing airplane. Codenamed Kohler by NATO, the AN-72 was the Antonov Bureau's first jet aircraft. It was intended to replace earlier turboprop transports. The jet engines were mounted high to prevent foreign object damage to the engine intakes, a significant danger when operating from rough airstrips covered with ice and snow. The position of the jet engines takes advantage of upper surface blowing technology, known as USB. Exhaust traveling over the wing helps create added lift during short takeoff conditions. In 1968, the Lockheed C-5A Galaxy took the title of the world's largest aircraft from the Antonov Antheus. The Galaxy's wingspan was 222 feet. Its maximum takeoff weight of almost 770,000 pounds was more than 200,000 pounds greater than the giant Russian AN-22. The C-5A was also much faster and had more range. It was the undisputed world's heavy-lift transport aircraft. At the 1985 Paris Air Show, the Russian answer to the C-5A descended. It was so huge that it seemed to fill the sky. The giant lumbered down the runway in front of the startled onlookers. It was a third larger than the monster Lockheed Galaxy. Its wingspan is 240 feet, almost 20 feet wider. Its maximum takeoff weight exceeds the Galaxy by more than 100,000 pounds. But its range carrying a maximum payload is shorter, and it is not as fast as the Galaxy. When the performance of the AN-22 Antheus was found lacking by Soviet authorities, its production run was prematurely stopped. Ole Antonov was personally commissioned to produce a successor even larger than the Lockheed Galaxy. The jet engine builder Latarev was assigned the task of producing the D-18T, the Soviet Union's first large turbofan. The new airlifter was designed by Antonov using experience gained from the Antheus and also from what they learned from the American C-5A program. It was designated the AN-124 and named the Ruslan, after the immortal hero of Pushkin's writings. When the Ruslan took to the air on its first flight in 1982, it assumed the mantle of the world's largest aircraft. In all respects, the result was a masterpiece. The fact that the Soviet aircraft industry was able to produce a transport of such great size that was more than just a showpiece came as a shock to some Western observers. Each of its giant Latorov turbofans generated more than 50,000 pounds of thrust. The robust D-18T engines made the transport, codenamed Condor by NATO, a very impressive performer. On July the 26th, 1985, an AN-124 set 21 official records. It carried a payload of more than 377,000 pounds to an altitude of 35,000 feet. This was more than 50% greater than the records previously set by the Galaxy. Soviet designers were very touchy about the code names assigned to their aircraft by NATO. Sometimes unflattering names were chosen that underscored the bitter rivalry in East-West relations. But NATO paid homage to the remarkable AN-124 Rusland and its designers. They named it the Condor after the world's largest flying bird. In the mid-1990s, this AN-124 arrived in Hamburg, Germany on a special transport mission. It was leased to carry a vintage 50-year-old Junkers Ju-52 to America for a 10-month goodwill tour. The event was sponsored by the German national airline Lufthansa. The Junkers Ju-52 was disassembled and packed into a large shipping container prior to loading into the Condor's massive cargo hold. The main hold is cavernous. It is 118 feet long and 21 feet wide. A huge titanium floor covers the entire area. This is necessary to support the immense loads the Ruslan is designed to accommodate. Extensive use of composite materials in the structure of the hold allows great strength without the weight of metal. The Condor has two large access points. One is located at the nose, and the other, under the rear of the fuselage, features a combination door and ramp. The great airlifter can be loaded from both ends at the same time. The aircraft has a crew of 7, along with accommodations for a reserve crew on long-duration flights. When the Soviet airline Aeroflot offered the Condor for international charter work in 1989, Antonov officials believed it had significant advantages due to the aircraft's huge load capacity, as well as its ability to operate from unprepared surfaces. The AN-124 is an outstanding transport. It is far ahead of its rivals as the world's largest in production. It is ironic that once, early in the 20th century, the Russians had only Junkers aircraft to fly as transports. Now they are transporting Junkers, like this veteran Ju-52, inside the giant Ruslan. In 1989, against a backdrop of Canada's majestic western mountains, a lone MiG-29 swept down. It was a time of good feelings. The Cold War was finally beginning to thaw.
And now I think it would be a nice time to welcome all our friends from the Soviet Union who are down at the south end of the field and thank them for bringing this amazing group of airplanes to our airfield this year. Let's have a nice round of applause for our entire Soviet delegation.
The star of the show was the massive Russian giant, the AN-225. Weighing in at over 475,000 pounds and propelled by 6 D-18T Latroyev turbofan engines, this is by far the heaviest and most powerful aircraft ever built. The Antonov Design Bureau designed the AN-225 in response to a requirement for a transporter to carry the Soviet version of the space shuttle. It was first seen at the 1989 Paris Air Show, with its counterpart, the Buran, or Blizzard, mounted atop its massive shoulders. The project was given the Ukrainian name Mriya, or Dream. After the Paris Air Show, the AN-225 made a series of goodwill visits intended to increase international awareness as well as Soviet prestige. One of the first flights was to Airshow Canada, held in Abbotsford, British Columbia. The huge Antonov transport was escorted by 2 MiG-29 fighters. This was the first visit either aircraft had made to North America. The evolution of the AN-225 was remarkable. It first flew just 6 years after the prototype of its predecessor, the AN-124. The actual time of development was only 3.5 years, from the beginning of studies to the flight of the prototype aircraft. Development time of the Soviet monster was drastically reduced by using major sections of the AN-124 whenever possible. Many components are the same, but the AN-225 is a different aircraft. It is altogether larger, with a much greater airlift capability. Anyone who witnesses Antonov's dream in flight will realize that the Miria is truly the king of the transports.